Thank you all for coming out tonight on this stormy night. Kind of interesting. It's a little bit, when it's so wet outside, it's a little out of mind how dry and flammable it can get out there. So in a way, it's good to be here on a wet night and think about the alternatives. My name is Robert Sterling. I'm the editor of the IJ. This is our second live IJ Forums show. We're really happy with it. We're going to try to keep doing this periodically around the county, go to different public venues, and talk about issues of great interest to the community. The format here is I'm going to turn the mic over to our host, Dick Spotswood. He'll discuss the topic with our panelists, and we'll go for about 40 minutes, or I hope exactly 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up to you. If you have specific questions, comments, observations, just come over here to the podium and go ahead and make your comment, and Dick will direct it to the appropriate person. So I think that's it. With that all, well, there are people still coming in, so let me make sure everyone's got a seat. We may have to pull a couple more chairs in. There's one chair up here, and looks like there's one chair over here, and there's a couple spares I can pull out, and other than that, we might be standing room only. Okay, I think we're good. So welcome, and with that, introduce Dick Spotswood, who will announce our guests.
Well, Robert, thank you very much. I'm Dick Spotswood, politics and government columnist for the Marin Independent Journal, and welcome to Marin IJ Forum. Our topic tonight is fire, wildfire. The greatest threat to life and property in the county of Marin is wildfire. We've all just witnessed a calamity of unspeakable proportions in our northern neighbors in Napa and Sonoma County. A fire that, under a usually dry day with high winds from the northeast, ran out of control and consumed not only hillside homes, but good portions of the flat and residential portions of the city of Santa Rosa. Weeks later, we saw that the same disaster hit San Diego County, then it hit Ventura County, then it hit Santa Barbara County. Santa Barbara County faced a double whammy just 2 weeks after that, because the fire caused the trees to be burned and loosened the soil, and mudslid. Basically, a mud flow ruined a good portion of the town of Montesino. It took as many lives and almost as much property as the fire did. So it was the ultimate double whammy. This region has seen fires for years. In 1923, we had a fire that started in Ignacio, part of Novato today. It ran over the hills into Lucas Valley, into Fairfax, into Woodacre, and all the way over into Bolinas Ridge, and the only thing that stopped it was the Great Pacific Fire break itself to Malice Bay. In 1945, we had a giant fire that consumed much in central Marin, and of course in 1929 we had the Great Mill Valley Fire, which was devastating then, and which today would be far more devastating. We have our neighbors over in the Oakland and Berkeley Hills. In 1991, witnessed a calamity which destroyed much of their community. And I think most of us remember in 1995 when the Mount Vision fire decimated the Point Reyes Peninsula. This is an area of similar climate, topography, residential development, and openness to dry northeast winds, as Sonoma County is. We face the exact same risk. As I said, it's the greatest threat to life and property in the county of Marin. We've got the wake-up call now that's going to spend the next hour talking to three folks who really know quite a bit about it. They're people who have built up an expertise over the years in fire, wildfire, and know what to do. The question is, will we, government, and the private sector in Marin County do what we have to do? We'll find out tonight. Our guests are Supervisor Katie Rice. Welcome indeed, Supervisor. Katie Rice represents the 2nd Supervisorial District, which is the Ross Valley into southern and western San Rafael, Larkspur,
Yep.
Kent Woodlands,
Yep.
Kentfield, Ross, That's the second district. She's the liaison on the Board of Supervisors and has been the point person on the issue of fire and emergency preparedness in general, disaster. Welcome, Supervisor Rice. You've been on this with us before.
Yeah.
Good to have you again.
Thanks for
Todd
having me.
Landau is the coordinator of Fire Safe Marin, a multi-jurisdictional coordinator of agencies around the county of Marin to get us ready to prepare not just for fire suppression, fire prevention, and also emergency preparedness, basically to get the folks out if the worst case scenario happens. It's a pleasure to have you on IJ Forum.
Thanks for inviting me.
Ray Moritz. Ray is a urban forester based in San Rafael. Ray's been working on the issue of anything to do with trees and often with fire for years. Ray knows this issue cold, and he is a true expert. As the courts will testify, he has testified as an expert, and he is an expert and knows what he's talking about. These are our three guests tonight. You'll have a chance to question them after 7:40. And let's start off right now. Ray, okay.
Yes.
You've said before that when it comes to fire suppression, putting out fire, Marin County gets an A.
Absolutely.
When it comes to fire prevention, for the next big one, it gets an F.
That's right.
What do you mean?
Well, the problem is that there hasn't been enough effort in the prevention area. There hasn't been enough dollars in the prevention area. We spend big dollars on suppression, but as you can see from the Tubbs fire up in Santa Rosa, the fires down in Ventura County and Santa Barbara County, that under the most severe fire weather conditions, suppression doesn't work so well. So we need to rethink the way we live with fire. And I would champion the fire service and the public and all concerned parties to get together and to work on prevention, so that we can get the intensity and rate of spread of fire down to a level that they can be effectively suppressed.
Katie, you've been involved in this issue for years, and fire prevention is part of the task that you've devoted yourself to. What can we as a community, in general, not specific towns right now, but in general for this county, what can we do to enhance our fire prevention efforts?
Well, I think that what Ray's talking about speaks to a philosophical change that was made decades ago around how we deal with fire. And I think that that idea of getting into the wildland, or the suppression, the way we're suppressing, is going to be looked at, but I don't think it's the only solution. And I think that this challenge we face is really across the board. It's not just about fire agencies and government doing the right thing and preventing fire or putting out fires. It's also gets way down to the property owner level, and that's what we saw up in those Sonoma County fires. Is embers were flying 2 miles. They were flying from open space, public open space, into urban areas. So I do think still a heavy focus on property owner preventative measures, hardening homes, defensible space is really going to be key. And then we have to really up our game also on how we are managing, doing the veg management on our open space and public lands. And that's everything from everyone from the open space district to MMWD to private property owners on the WUI. But it has to be a coordinated effort across the board, and it has to be from the highest levels of government down to the private property owners, working on prevention and doing it in a coordinated fashion.
Todd, let's stick on prevention for a second and I'll ask you. It doesn't seem like we're in drive right now. We're still in first gear to get things going. What do we need to do to get us moving along at a greater rapid speed?
I tend to disagree with that.
Okay.
That we're in first gear. I think that the issue, the public may see it that way. It's certainly at the forefront of everybody's minds right now. We're all meeting here in January in the rain. For years, groups like Fire Safe Marin, Katie and Ray participate. A number of members of the audience participate in our group, and we've been dying to get the public interested in this topic in January. But people won't talk about it typically. Yeah. The events of last year were tragic, and they brought it to the forefront. So I think when we look at the efforts that are being made. In 2016, the county adopted the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. That was a 2-year multi-jurisdictional effort involving every land manager in the county, state parks, open space, the national parks, large private landowners, every fire agency, homeowners groups, HOAs, a huge, diverse group of people got together for 2 years and put together one of the best science-based community wildfire protection plans that I'm aware of in the country. And we've been working to enact that and to take the recommendations of that plan and implement them since then. We haven't accelerated necessarily since the fires, although I think that's not necessarily the right way to put it. But we were already in fourth gear when the fires in Santa Rosa hit, and when the fires in the Thomas Fire hit.
Let me follow up on that a little bit. A couple of years ago, I went back with the head of Marin Parks, the open space districts, and I'd written a piece, perhaps, I think we ought to be a bit more aggressive. And she said, let me take you up on the wildland and let me show you what we've done in some of the park stuff. And she took me up on Alto Hill, Horse Hill, and a number of places. And what they had done was terrific. It was just first-rate, thorough, textbook. Any member of the public would have seen it, would have said, this is the right way to do it. The problem was it needed to expand, and it needed more money and more labor and more effort. And so the concept was great, but I just don't know how. It's very expensive to get this done on a comprehensive basis. How do you do it with the limited funds we have today?
Well, so I'm going to step in there, Dick, because actually the people of Marin County stepped up and voted in Measure A in 2012, and Linda Dahl, who was head of
That's Linda
Parks,
Dahl.
that's who you're
Thank
with, part of the impetus behind Measure A was to create some additional funding for veg management, and that money has been put to use. And then you also speak to, and that was a really important period here, I think, in Marin County, 2012-13. I saw a big change in the way our land managers started working together with fire agencies as opposed to and coordinating their efforts. And Linda Dahl helped us, I think, move in a direction where we are applying veg management funds as a fire agency and or as the county of Marin or as the land manager in dialogue with the local fire agency and with a plan for ongoing veg management as opposed to one-off fire fuel reduction projects. We knew we had to look ahead as how do you do a fuel reduction project and then continue to maintain it over time. And we're making progress, I think, on our public lands, but there's a long way to go.
Ray, you have consulted before the big Sonoma fire with the folks at the Fountain Grove neighborhood.
Yes.
And had been up there and worked with them, and they took some steps. Can you tell us what steps they took and why those steps still wasn't enough? What could they have done differently that they did?
They, as you'll see once we get into the PowerPoint, they took huge steps.
You have to maintain the exiting.
Yeah, you can't be doing this.
You can't be putting.
If someone wants to sit up
Yeah.
here, they can sit here.
Our fire chiefs.
You want to start the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Let's do
Why
that right
don't
now.
we start it? But, okay. Starting with, wildfire is a natural element of our environment. It occurred with great frequency in pre-settlement times. In Marin County, fire periodicity studies done on Mount Tamalpais showed that fire visited us in an intensity strong enough to scar a redwood or a Douglas fir, which is a pretty good intensity, every 25 to 30 years, and much more frequent at low intensity. The Miwok people learned to live with fire and even to use fire as a tool to keep themselves and their grain stores safe. Of course, they had about 9,000 years before we showed up, so we still got time, right? So our redwood trees, this one is in Roy's Redwoods, right over near the golf course in San Geronimo Valley. We need to learn how to live with fire because it's not going away anytime soon. In Fountain Grove, that community, as particularly their open space committee, was very forward-looking. This right-hand photograph here shows these green areas, and those are fuel breaks of a minimum of 100 feet wide built around their entire community. And as Supervisor Rice was saying, defensible space is still important, even if you have a 100-foot fuel break. As she was pointing out, fire embers and brands blow well ahead of the fire, and most homes are ignited by fire brands and embers, not by the big, massive, major flame front igniting the house. And people in Fountain Grove, the majority did not have fire-wise landscaping. And as a result, over 500 of the 600 homes were destroyed. Fountain Grove is located on a hilltop, so it has steep slopes and what firefighters call chimneys coming up through drainages. Ascending drainages act very much like the chimney on your house or fireplace. They draw hot air and they draw the fire up very rapidly. Firefighters have been aware of this for many years, and as a matter of fact, they have a little motto of "Don't park your truck in a saddle," which is what's at the top of the chimney. They also had a warning that they should have noticed, and the fire department was certainly aware of. In 1964, we had essentially the same fire. It burned almost all the way to Steely Lane, and it followed pretty much the same exact pattern and the same exact behavior. Fortunately, in 1964, there weren't many houses built in that area, so there wasn't such a catastrophic loss of property and of people. Now there's a lot of homes in that area. These worst case fire weather conditions are created what we call Diablo winds around here. They're called Santa Anas down Southern California, Sundowners in Santa Barbara, Chinooks in Colorado, where my family lived. They operate pretty much the same way. It's when you have a high pressure system in the Central Valley beyond the Sierra, and a low pressure system offshore. And it draws the wind across country at a phenomenal rate, building up heat and dryness as it passes. Obviously, when it passes through the Central Valley and finally gets to us, it's pretty dry, pretty hot, pretty low humidity. And it's the worst case scenario. In Fountain Grove, it came out of the hills, as did the 64 fire, and up into Fountain Grove quite rapidly. And this was the aftermath. Home after home was consumed. So what were the reasons? The Open Space Committee did a really tremendous job for about 8-9 years now, and I've been involved in it for the past 7 years. They took wildland fuels like this picture shows and this picture here. One thing they were very concerned about, and I was very concerned about, is the invasion of Douglas fir. We have the same thing going on here. We often talk about exotic, non-native invasive plants, but some of our most invasive plants, like Douglas fir and coyote bush, are just as much or even more of a problem in terms of fire behavior. So in this picture, you will see there's just probably 24 Douglas fir overtopping the oaks, not only creating a fire problem, but destroying the biological variety of the landscape. So Fountain Grove took and thinned these areas out, creating what's called a shaded fuel break to protect the homes above. They thinned out Douglas fir groves and completely transformed the landscape into a very park-like setting, which actually is more natural than what we have in our wildland environment today. What we have in our wildland environment today is just as unnatural as a clear cut, but it's at the other end of the spectrum. It's tremendous fuel loading that did not exist in pre-settlement times, that was not natural. And we have created a condition that's extremely unnatural. Many people up there made attempts at defensible space. As you can see, this person mowed, so why did they burn? Well, what they needed was expertise to guide them. What they had beyond the mowing, right up next to their house, is juniper and what we call a bed of opportunity. If a firebrand or a embers start landing in these fine fueled things like Australian tea, hopseed bush, etc., juniper, they're going to go up in flames and they're going to burn intensely. And if you have those right outside your windows, the fire will shatter the windows and it'll enter the house very easily. So you have to watch out for your structure vulnerabilities. Also, heat traps, like an overhanging roof over a deck, traps heat and allows the house to be ignited more easily. So the house had high structural vulnerability, but the real problem was the combination between fuels and vulnerable structure characteristics. We had certain people in Fountain Grove that would do nothing, and they put everybody else at risk. They put the people evacuating at risk, they put the responding firefighters at risk, and they put their immediate neighbors at risk. This person had a neighbor who I think went overboard. He practically made a desert out of his landscape. But the question is whether it did his survivability any good when his next door neighbor had heavy fuels coming up between them and he had done his work. So we have to work together as a community and resolve these problems. We in Marin County are on notice as well. The map is over there on the wall. This is a map produced by Wagner? I'm forgetting his name. Gardner. Gardner ran the lookout up on Mount Tamalpais from the 1930s through the mid-1940s. And he made these maps, which I happen to have inherited, of the fires. And they were talking about the 1923 fire. It actually went all the way to the Bolinas Ridge above Stinson Beach and Bolinas, and even down the face of the west face of the ridge a ways, going through Fairfax, a portion of Fairfax, and the San Geronimo Valley. So then we had the 29 fire, which actually this picture shows the fire at the start of the fire. It was storming down toward downtown Mill Valley on maritime winds off the ocean. And suddenly fire weather worsened and winds came in out of the east and pushed the fire up the mountain. So actually worse fire weather in this unusual situation saved the downtown Mill Valley by pushing the fire to the west up the mountain. But this was the results, and I think you've seen the same pictures in 1929, taken in 1929, in the past year. The chimneys always seem to survive. Our motto of the fire department I was in used to say, "We've never lost a foundation yet." This is a picture taken through a telescopic lens from San Francisco of our 1945 fire. Burned 18,000 acres in the Marin Municipal Water District watershed. The trees, as you will know today, know how to respond to fire, as did the Miwoks, and survived quite well and reproduced. But the people are a different story. This is the 1945 fire storming down to the Great Pacific Fire Break, and they did not report any spot fires over in Hawaii. And this is the 1945 fire. What has happened in Marin? This is Blythedale Avenue in Mill Valley. Do you recognize it? Not really. Things have changed. People love trees, and trees love a lack of fire, as well as many of them being dependent on fire. So trees were not growing, and also they were grazing the land as well. So this is the environment that we Anglos came into, or Europeans, I should say. This is Mill Valley in 1891. This is the house here that is in this picture here. And then there's a little church over here that you can see in these later pictures after people started planting trees in the circa 1900. Down in the lower picture, that's 1913 or 14, I believe. These pictures are in the Marin, A History of Marin County. There's a book that I took them from. Here's San Anselmo, back at the turn of the century. Here's San Anselmo today. You have to conclude that there's just a heck of a lot more fuel out there. And one reason we've had trouble dealing with fuels, one reason I say we get an F, and I say we, I'm not putting it all on the fire department. I'm putting it on all levels of government and the citizens as well. I'm a forester. I love trees. My life has been trees. And I'm a real conservationist. But this is the environment we've created, and this is the environment we need to manage. I think there needs to be much greater use of fire as a tool, and there's a lot of stumbling blocks to that, especially air quality control. But tell me about air quality during these fires in the past year. Air quality control needs to put their hat on with their bill facing forward, and they need to think about how we're going to live with fire in the future.
Katie and Todd, I'm just questioning. Ray reminded me something. Katie, I'm sure you remember Jack Barnard, who was the husband of Mayor Gene Barnard in Mill Valley. And Jack one time famously said, there are too many trees in Mill Valley. And people went crazy. There's too many trees. What he was referring to was those pictures, the old days. We don't want to clear cut the forest, obviously. We love it. It's what makes Marin. But we need to thin it. And a lot of that takes place on private land. How do we facilitate that to happen?
I actually have, Todd may want to talk more about this, but I was thinking of a project that's coming up in Sleepy Hollow pretty soon, and it's a project that involves Marin County Open Space District, Sleepy Hollow Fire District, private landowner, Fire Safe Marin, and it is combining grazing on open lands plus one of these shaded fuel breaks or a fuel reduction project. What else? But it's exactly what you're talking about, and what the project came to being with an identification of we've got some open space lands around a community on a ridge, high fire risk, and the Sleepy Hollow Fire District went to, I believe, the landowners and looked for their interest in participation, and Open Space District was involved because of some adjacent lands, and it is an example of the kinds of projects that have been happening and will continue to happen, need to, but frankly need to probably happen more often. I think, though, that Todd should also talk about the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which hits on all these in all these areas.
Todd?
I think it's really important to, when you look at these photographs, Ray used the word overwhelming, and it is. The change has been tremendous. But we don't need to necessarily to manage the vegetation on every inch of that photograph that we're looking at right now to reduce the risk for the community. Our real goal here is to prevent homes from igniting and to prevent people from being injured. Wildfire is a natural part of our environment. There's going to be wildfire here, whether we return that to the state it looked like in 1881, or we continue to manage it the way we're managing it today. Wildfire is always going to be part of the environment in Marin. We can't change that. What we can change is what happens to the communities that are built in the wildland-urban interface when a fire impacts them. And that's much easier to manage. We're talking about fuel reduction, like the project Katie mentioned in Sleepy Hollow, fuel reduction around the periphery of the communities, fuel reduction that starts at the back wall of the houses that abut the open space and extends to their property lines, and then beyond that to some extent. So we're looking at, for example, buffer zones, defensible space zones, and shaded fuel breaks that extend only about 200 feet from houses. And the science shows that 200 feet is what we need to address.
Putting the onus for a second on the private sector, people's own homes, it's very expensive. Everybody, I think, we have a standing room crowd tonight, because people understand the danger of fire to their own homes and their families. And they want to do what's right, but it's very expensive. To remove a tree, Ray, you know what the cost of these things are. We're talking just a couple of trees, a couple of $1,000s sometimes, right?
Absolutely.
Is there any way to...
At least.
Yeah, at least. I mean, we've had ideas in the past of creating funds, borrowing funds, basically for solar improvements. Remember, we did that. Any way to extend that concept so people have some way to go, to have some way to finance? It's so relatively cheap. I know it's thousands of dollars. When your house burns down, it looks like peanuts. What can we do now to facilitate folks with laterals, sewage laterals? There's been programs to facilitate the creation of sewage laterals. That's great. It seems to be, if anything, at least as equally high a need.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I think the sewer laterals is a good model. I think, frankly, the Fire Safe Chipper Days is another kind of a model where Fire Safe has some grant money that it will extend to a community as a matching grant for a chipper program that's not property specific. I also think, and I had a conversation with Paul Minot earlier in the evening around, at some level, people can take responsibility for their properties, and it's not necessarily always removing a tree. It could be just limbing it up, correct? So part of the solution is actually getting folks the right information about what is the way to address their property. And then I think if there is a financial barrier, I think a grant program makes a lot of sense.
When after I talked to Ray recently, he told me that one of the dangerous plants was rosemary. Rosemary is a very flammable plant. I've lived here 42 years. I'd never heard that before. And he said, well, some people are crazy enough to have one right by a window, the picture window in their house. It's just, after I left you, I immediately went home and pulled out my rosemary bush, which is by a picture window in my house. My wife says, where's the rosemary bush? It's been there forever. Well, I said I had breakfast with Ray. But everybody can't have breakfast with Ray.
No.
So, Todd, how do we get that message out to the folks? I follow all this stuff for years. Really? I went home and tear up the brush.
Communicating this message to the public is our primary goal with Fire Safe Marin, and really our goal with that Community Wildfire Protection Plan. Every issue that we identified really requires the public either to adopt the recommendations that we made or to buy into the concepts that we need the community to buy into as far as the social changes. I think it's really important. You brought up the trees a minute ago and the cost of removing a tree. Ray is the one who taught me early on that you almost never need to remove a mature tree in order to reduce the risk of fire on your property. Removing a tree is a mature tree is with the exception of some particularly hazardous species is rarely recommended. You're far better off if you're looking at removing a tree or investing that same money into hardening your structure, for example. If you have
What do you mean by that?
$2,500 to remove a tree or to harden your structure, I would recommend that you harden the structure by doing some simple upgrades, finer mesh screens over the vents and all of the openings on your house, having a painter come and caulk all of the cracks and gaps that embers can find their way into on the exterior of your house, looking at screens or covers over your rain gutters. Cleaning your rain gutters can make a far bigger impact than removing a single specimen of a mature tree.
Why?
Because we need to look at how houses ignite during wildfires. This is one of the primary focuses of our CWPP, was looking at structural ignitability. What actually makes the homes ignite? If we don't understand how the fire spread and how the individual homes ignite, we can't address the problem. And we've known for years that it's these millions and millions, trillions of tiny embers that are generated by the wildfire and that blow ahead of the wildfire and the winds that really ignite most of the structures. That's what ignites most of the vegetation. In Fountain Grove, those properties that didn't have good vegetation in the center of the community, the homes that weren't at the edge where they were impacted by the wildfire itself, those homes ignited because tiny embers found places to ignite either the home itself or the vegetation that was right up against the home, ornamental vegetation a lot of times. So one ember that makes its way through a vent that isn't properly screened is all it takes to ignite your home and burn it to the ground.
Katie, some years ago, we had a city manager in this county, a well-regarded one, that said after a disaster, and he was speaking then of earthquake, but it applies to fire, earthquake, or whatever have you, that for the public, there's a 6-month window where they're really paying attention. You know, it's been extended because the fire season in Southern California, especially the mudslides in Santa Barbara County, probably extended that 6 months a little bit, but not much more than that. By next summer, which is fire season again, the 6 months will pass. What can we do to keep the public's interest and the public sector's interest focused on making solid progress?
Well, and I would say it is our primary task to keep the public engaged and paying attention to this, and it's because it's going to take time, frankly, for all of us to do the things we need to do at the public level and at the private property level to protect ourselves as well as we can. And unfortunately, I suspect we're going to continue to have fires, and frankly, the attention will grow even without us helping it grow. I want to go back though to one thing on this, on the what should a private property owner do? Almost every fire agency, I think, has fire inspectors or folks within their fire departments who will go out and give a private property owner, look at their home and make recommendations on what they can do to reduce their fire risk. And to the degree that in going forward we can bolster that kind of a program, I think that's also something that we should all be looking at trying to support. Because really it is about guidance, and it isn't just about taking down a tree. And it is sometimes about the little things, the screening on the vents. So I think that's really important. I think that there will be no lack of attention by the public sector on this. I don't think there has been a lack of attention, frankly. I think our biggest challenge in the past has been getting private property owners to actually recognize how important it is that we take responsibility at all levels. So I really appreciate all this forum and everything that's going on. But we've got how many fire agencies how many fire districts in the county, lots of fire personnel, lots of different communities, and frankly, it is really working at all those levels and all the way down to the neighborhood level. And we haven't talked about that yet. I know you're going to start questions, but one of the biggest lessons learned coming out of the Sonoma fires, and we'll get a formal debrief on that in the coming months. And one of the saddest things was the fact that neighbors didn't always know neighbors, and there was neighbors that were stranded. And community fire planning and prevention needs to get down to the neighborhood level, and neighbors knowing neighbors, not just to make sure that they're taking care of their defensible space needs, but so that if someone is going to be in need of help during an evacuation, someone will be there to help them.
I'm going to ask. Please.
We would be remiss if we didn't mention here, in loud terms, under Todd's stewardship, Fire Safe Marin has produced a website that is unparalleled. It is outstanding. And Todd, could you mention how the website can help people and guide them to smart defensible space?
We've really worked hard over the last 4 years before that to produce a really useful tool for residents of Marin with specific information for Marin on how you can address the wildfire issue. If you live anywhere in Marin, the issue can affect you. Whether you live in downtown Santa Fe in a neighborhood that really isn't affected by wildfire, you will be impacted if a fire hits your community. Ask the city of Santa Rosa right now how their budget's doing. The city's in a crisis because of the huge impact to the community. So everybody really is at risk in Marin, whether you live in the WUI or not. So our website and the information that Fire Safe Marin provides homeowners is really valuable. Everything from our FireWise community program, which everybody here should have a little intro to on your seat. The FireWise community program is something we're really pushing hard. On February 9th, we're going to have a workshop in Novato to try to teach neighborhood organizers, community leaders, about this program that can help organize neighborhoods and give you a framework for maintaining wildfire preparedness in your neighborhood perpetually. It's really important that we don't forget about this next year and that we develop a plan that works in the long term. We have information that Ray helped us last year revise what has been an incredibly useful tool for the last 25 years, fire safe plant list that we offer from Marin to help homeowners choose the right plants when you're at the nursery and looking at landscaping your home. Choose plants that are fire resistant versus plants that are more combustible. We've got some great tools, fantastic information, links to all of your local fire agencies and ways that you can find those people at your local fire department that can help come do an inspection of your home, provide one-on-one guidance for the little steps that you can take in your home to reduce its ignitability. I think it's a great tool.
I'm going to ask anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question to come up to our podium here in a somewhat orderly fashion. And the gentleman here, fine, and he'll be our model because he's going to start off by telling us his name and his hometown and who would you like to direct the question to?
Red Blake. I live in Mill Valley, born and raised in Marin. My question is probably to the supervisor, but to Todd also. Are you aware of the fire prevention program in Atascadero, California, in Central California?
I'm not.
Okay.
Ray's nodding his head that
But
he
the-
is, though.
Yeah.
It had a fire come into the city approximately 25, 30 years ago. Atascadero does 100%. If you don't cut your land down to whatever their law says, their ordinance, they hire off of a list and send the people to your property to do the shaded area type of what was described there by Ray. And every year, because that's one of the things, every year, 11,000 parcels are checked by one person. You can call a Atascadero Fire Department and talk to the person who does it. And it is the most successful program in the state for having a town that will not burn because the flame lengths will not be produced by the fuel that doesn't exist there. I'm very, very worried about my house in Mill Valley for these reasons right there. That's number one. Number two, I'll be very quick here. I don't think you're approaching this at all correct by basically letting the folks decide how they're going to do it, and you're dealing at one neighborhood at a time. I fought the Hanley fire as a teenager, and I saw what it did, and I went up there the morning that those fires were just coming over the hill into Santa Rosa. It's gonna happen here, and it's gonna be a failure of government because the four big landowners aren't here.
They are.
They're here.
They're here?
They're all here.
Okay. I would like to ask the four big landowners if you would please arrange to give a briefing to let us in the public know what you're doing to reduce the fire fuel load up on Mount Tam. 30 years ago, it was over 100 tons per acre on Mount Tam. The point is taken that you don't need to go up there and reduce everything, but between the dead tree, well, right there in the Marin County Wildfire Protection Plan, page 67, we are in trouble. Thank you.
Next speaker. Our next question.
So, and Brett, well, while the next speaker's coming up, I think your point is very well taken
Yes,
about
please.
the Atascadero and there needing to be actually more muscle and some regulation around getting, but in this county, because we have multiple jurisdictions, it is going to happen from community level to community level. So I do think, and I know your city of Mill Valley is really on top of this, and I would bring, okay, well,
Disagree, ma'am. We're not seeing any reduction.
well, so Brett, I would say, I think that it is important for your town council to hear you. I also expect there to be recommendations coming out of the countywide working group that's happening right now around things, not just around what open space or public lands can do, but also what sort of regulation should be considered at the local level towards ensuring that we are hardening our homes and creating the defensible space that we really need.
Next gentleman,
Good people don't understand that you only have until fire season gets tough next August, because then we're there. And
Yep.
all right,
Thank
next
you.
gentleman.
I'm David Kessel. I live in the county, so I'm not susceptible to trying to get Mill Valley to do the defense. I would submit that for cars, we have a smog rule that says if you don't get your car smog level, you don't drive. We have ordinances, according to these brochures, that have defensible space laws. We have ordinances that have 10 foot of clearance beyond any road. I don't see them enforced. And I would ask the county and any that place why we can drive around and find hundreds of variations in one day, and those aren't enforced. That's a failure of government. And why we don't, at the county level, for example, enact ordinances like is talked about in Pescadera. Doing a quick web search, I spent, half an hour, found that one. We don't have it here. So what is the failure of government, and how do we correct that to have enforcement to enforce what we're having? And we talked about Measure A funds. I live in the Tam Valley area. We are told that the grant ran out for chipper days. There will be no chipper days this year. So even homeowners who clear their own stuff with their own labor have no way of getting rid of this stuff in an economical way. And so is the county supplying chipper days to that? Where are the measures to say that every community is covered by a chipper day? Where is the measure that says that we have successive levels year by year? This year 50%, next year 70%, the next year 85%, the next year 95% of conformance to the ordinances and adoption of that. So I would urge, or my question is, what's preventing us from doing that set of things which fall right in line with the previous speaker's
I'd like
notes?
to address some of what you said. First of all, there's no change in the chipper program. The Fire Safe Marin administers the chipper program that you're referring to, and it's funded for the year, so you don't need to be too worried about
The
that.
people in Tam Junction don't know about it, and
Well,
they are people who
we
should,
were on
including the
phone
fire
today.
department.
Here's the good
We
news.
schedule those chipper days in the spring, so there's been no change in that.
Here's the good news. One of the questions, this is an opportunity why this is good, because Todd can give a call to those folks tomorrow and say, hey, we got money.
Yeah, I was on the phone with them before I came here. So, but regardless, I want to just make you aware that the Fire Safe Marin, a big part of our funding for the chipper program comes from the county of Marin. The county's upped their contribution to Fire Safe Marin by 50% this year. You're going to see an expansion of our chipper program. PG&E has historically, and not just after the fires, has always been a huge partner to Fire Safe Marin, funding a huge amount of vegetation management work in the county. We're going to see at least the same, if not significantly more money next year from PG&E and some of our other partners. So you'll see expansions in all of these programs. As far as the Atascadero and the defensible space inspections and the enforcement, I think you said you live in the county. The Marin County Fire Department does a tremendous job with defensible space inspections every year, doing thousands, if not tens of thousands, of inspections countywide, and enforcing the Public Resources Code. And in your case, and the local agencies do the same thing. Mill Valley Fire Department enforcing their local ordinances that apply. But all of the fire agencies in the county have adopted those standards, the same standards that Atascadero has adopted. Whether or not the ability to enforce them, I'm very curious how Atascadero does that, because in order to enter someone's property to do that work requires a warrant and a tremendous amount of legal legwork. So one person doing 11,000 properties is not happening. But I'm going to look into it because I wasn't aware of Atascadero's program.
I'm sorry to tell you that it is factually happening and has been happening for quite some time. And when I asked the question, you admitted you'd never heard of it before. So I really don't like being called a liar.
Well, nobody's calling anybody. Okay. What we're going to do, first of all, that's the last question you get, because I ran meetings for a long time, and I don't allow that. Simple as that. One of the problems we have in this country today, give me a speech now, is that we can't talk to each other civilly. Hopefully we have a reservoir, the Marin County, we can do that. And all I can say is when I run a meeting, we do. Next.
Hi, excuse me, my name is Cecily Drucker. I live in Mill Valley. I just want to ask a question first. How many of you live in homes that have 2 or more vehicles? How many of you are two or more vehicle homes? Virtually everybody. Guess what? We need an ordinance that says when you evacuate 1 car per property, we are all, Dick Spotswood is a neighbor of mine, we are all going to be SOL when it comes to evacuation, because everybody's going to pile all their crap and their pets and everything else in their 3 cars and drive them out, and you're not going to get very far. So I think it's really critical that we start doing some serious evacuation planning. Nobody's addressing this, okay? And I will tell you that when there's a first threat of a fire, I'm just leaving. Because if I wait to try and protect my house, forget it. Isn't going to happen. But I think seriously we need to do this, and I will also say to you, Todd, I do defensible space as much as I can. Every once in a while, like every 5 years, the city happens to be on the fire department. They come back and they say, you are a model. And I'm going, yes, and why don't you enforce it for everybody else? It doesn't happen. And it also doesn't happen in the public space. Across the street from Dick and my houses, there's a ravine. It's owned by the city. The last time it was cleared out was before I moved there in the 1980s. It has not been cleaned up. What do? I guess I can sue the city, but the city is not complying. We are having, as this gentleman said, government is not stepping up. Mill Valley is spending millions of dollars on steps and paths. They're very pretty. They're not spending anything on fire prevention, and it's a serious problem. Thank you.
Next speaker, or questioner.
Hello, I'm Charles Winstead, and
What town are you from?
I'm unincorporated part of Mill Valley, and I'm here representing a group. We call ourselves the Shoreline Highway Group, and we're involved in trying to raise awareness of fire prevention. John's there. David didn't mention he's part of the group. We've got about 40, 50 people, and we're really focused on Highway 1, the evacuation that was just brought up. We see that as also potentially an emergency vehicle access road. And I see a lot of stuff in this. I've gone to a lot of meetings. There's all this talk about, the property owners, the private sector, the people need to do their defensible space. The problem is that we have a lot of property owners that aren't doing anything for their part. We've got Caltrans completely non-responsive. We've had great effort with the dialogue with the Southern Marin Fire District. TCSD, that's our local community services district. Those are the folks we've been asking about chipper days. And yeah, they've told us several times there's no money left for chipper days. So maybe it's a different chipper day program, but at the TCSD, they don't have any money for chipper days. Caltrans, again, it's just can't get anywhere with Caltrans. Not only that, but we have lots. So West California Highway, there's 2 lots basically between Highway 1 and West California, and the lower lots are unbuildable. So there's a variety. There's people who actually pay their taxes, but they can't do anything with the property, and there's dozens really that are tax defaulted. Those people aren't doing anything to clear their space. So there's been a lot of call for like more ordinances, and I'm just like, no, we don't need any more ordinances. I'm trying to get building permits right now. I've been working on it for a year, and the complexity of getting anything done is we don't need any more ordinances. What we need is a little help from someone at a higher level that can maybe make a phone call to Caltrans and say, hey, why aren't you guys clearing the branches that are overhanging the highway, touching in the middle, dead, dying trees? They're not doing anything about those. I don't know what we can do about properties that are vacant, that I understand the defensible space ordinance doesn't apply to properties that don't have structures on them, but at least 10 feet from the edge of the road. So I'm just throwing that out there.
You raised a really good point. We ought to do this in a future IJ forum. We've kind of done prevention today, but we need to have a forum sometime this year about evacuation. And
Well,
when you raise the 10 feet on the road, and we have places where the canopy's over the road.
That's what I'm
Imagine
talking
if
about.
they were on
That's
fire.
what I'm talking about.
So that's the kind of thing. I think we'll do a focused evacuation program
Right.
coming up. So just let you know we're
So-
trying to be responsive.
Dick, standing right behind the speaker is Christy Neal, who is our county fire vegetation. And can she just clarify on what where the defensible space requirements are? And I think the vacant lot thing,
So, yeah, I can
question's
address the
interesting.
vacant lot. So the
Introduce
public,
yourself.
Christy Neal, Marin County Fire Department. I'm the Vegetation Management Battalion Chief. So the Public Resource Code is state law, 4291, and it requires 100-foot defensible space. If you have a vacant lot next to your property and you cannot get your 100 feet of defensible space because of that vacant lot does not do any clearing, we do have a county ordinance that deals with that landowner would have to create anywhere from 30 to a 50-foot fuel break so that you can obtain your 100 feet of defensible space. And so typically, if it's in my jurisdiction, I can write a letter to the vacant landowner and hopefully get some action. But there are requirements for vacant lot owners so that the neighbors can get their defensible space, but only up to what's required by the law.
Sir.
Hi, my name is Steve Zeman. I'm from North. I'm from San Rafael. I'm from Glenwood area out in East San Rafael. We have Get Ready Glenwood, as does Peacock Gap and so forth and so on. I think we've talked with you guys before. And we are dealing with all these problems. We're in the WUI. We had a fire up on our hill last year. It was arson, but it scared the hell out of us.
Sure.
It was on the ridge. And I think the things that I have the questions have been brought up, but I want to reemphasize them again. And that is evacuation plans. We're working with the San Rafael Fire Department. They are really helpful. We're trying to figure out, like many others here, we got only one street out. We all funnel in. Then we got one street out onto Point San Pedro. We're asking who's going to help us if this comes up. We think we're going to be the ones, the volunteers who are doing this. But we would love to get some more real cogent thought about evacuation plans, evacuation planning. The other thing is, I've got Nixle, I've got every damned alert on my phone. I had a friend living with me for a week. He was in Fountain Grove. He had 5 minutes to get out. We're also asking, why don't we have other things? We don't have sirens. We don't have sirens, at least in San Rafael. Maybe that's a city-by-city issue. But we really need something that will wake you up at 2 a.m. in the morning so you can check. If you have internet, if you have other things, but you can check so you can get out. So those are the things I wanted to bring up.
The siren issue came up actually some years ago in Mill Valley, and the public, and they reinstituted them. I mean, it's the kind of thing that constant pressure is essential. and a constant plan. We need this. You got to go down to City Hall, and you got to
We-
bang
we-
the fist on the table, you know that, and give them a good plan. The other thing is the folks here, by the way, I just want to emphasize, because we're winding down here, one of the great things is for neighborhood groups, Todd, your group, and I know almost every fire department in this county is willing to go out and meet with community groups and really go the mile. If you really want to know what to do,
They have
fire
been good. San
professionals know.
Rafael has been great. We've
Yeah.
had 3 meetings with them, but
Excellent.
we're working these things through. So, yeah, and we do know that the sirens will have to go to San Rafael, but if, you know.
And then I know I think it's a great idea to have something around evacuation planning in a larger forum, but Chief Weber, could you just come up here and explain what would happen if there were a fire that was going to require evacuation so that people know what the plan is?
Katie, would you
And/or Chris
introduce
Riley?
Chief Weber and explain who?
Yes, he'll introduce himself, I think, but.
Okay.
I'll do this very quickly. I know you want to get on to other people. We have a group right now that's looking at this. First, I want to acknowledge that all of the concerns are very real and they all should be addressed. Everybody's in this room. And we take that. I mean, I get up every morning and don't sleep at night sometimes because I worry about each and every person, as does my 5 bosses and the great folks up there. There was some great information here today, and the challenge involves all of us, not just one of us. But because I was going to be very specific, I will be. And that's what's going to happen in the event of emergency. So we need everybody to register on Alert Marin with VoIP, internet, phones. We don't have the old copper 911 reverse like we used to with everybody with a phone that rings in your house. You need to go to Alert Marin. You have to register for that. You've got to be involved with Nixle. And I think it goes back to the conversation about knowing your neighbors. Sometimes we need multiple notification systems. And whether it's sirens in some communities, whether it's neighbors going door to door, fire and police going door to door, we can't rely on a single point of contact. But we have the ability, an incident commander, we have evacuation maps that were done 8-9 years ago as part of a mutual threat zone in this county that we have already pre-designated neighborhoods with their primary evacuation routes. Chris Riley's in the room, the OES manager. One call to the duty officer, and we can immediately, in a pre-programmed computer system, notify everybody in that neighborhood that is registered or has a landline, and or through email, text messages, the rest of it. So,
Folks, Marin, Jason is the, you should know, the chief of the Marin County Fire Department.
Yes.
yes, sir.
So thank you for coming.
And that notification and that evacuation will be dependent on where you live, if there's only one way in or one way out. But if there's multiple ways, it's going to depend on which way the fire is moving, if that is the issue. And so to think that there's just one set evacuation plan is not wise. We really are going to want to get the instruction from the OES about where to go and when, and follow those directions.
We're just
And
about
then
out of
just
time,
to
so I'm
just
going
to
to
add,
ask you to ask a
yeah.
quick question. They're going to give you a quick answer. Quick question.
My name's John Simon-Tatcha. I'm born and raised here in Marin, San Rafael. I'm actually on the State Fire Marshal's Task Force for the Wildland Chapter 7A, and we've had a lot of discussions. Now, on our end, we're working on a lot of codes, but it's for new construction.
I'm going to have to ask you, you have a quick question?
No, I was just kind of.
Yeah, the
Okay.
trouble is it's on television, we're out of time.
Oh, okay.
So thanks for coming, folks.
All right.
Listen, folks, the folks who are on our panel here will be staying around a little bit after, directly. We also have in the back, with Chief Weber here and those kind of guys, this is a very good opportunity to just go up to these folks, meet them, and you might even say, if you have a neighborhood group, hey, can you come by our group and work it out? And he's nodding yes, we can. So we want to facilitate this. There's no greater danger. Every time I write about this, I say that the life and property in Marin than wildland fire. The worst is an earthquake starts the wildland fire. Katie Rice, thank you for coming. Todd Lando, Fire Save Marin, thank you. Ray Marks, thank you. I'm Dick Spotswood for the Marin Independent Journal's IJ Forum. Keep reading us and watching us every day of the week. Good night.